Go for the poles and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into the Philly Sports Power Hour with Bill Colarulo. On this rainy Tuesday, I see people saying it in the chat, miserable out there in Philadelphia today. But it is a sad morning for all Philadelphia sports fans today. And if you tuned in to the Legal Hands to the Face show last night, you're able to hear some of my reactions to the Jason Kelce retirement press conference, but we're going to get into it today as well. But not an easy day for Eagles fans, and I thought I was ready. I really thought I was ready for Jason Kelce to retire. But we'll talk about it. We'll do a little Flyers talk, a little Sixers talk, and I want to look around the NFL because a lot of news in the NFL over the last 24 hours that we need to talk about. And I see people in the chat talking about the hoodie representing the Fightin' Phils today. I'm getting excited. Even though it's spring training, I'm getting excited about this Phillies team. But let's get a little roll call. We're streaming live across the JAKIB Sports Network. We're streaming live across all Bill Colarulo Philly Sports Talk. So make sure you're subscribed everywhere. We are also live here on TikTok. But let's get a little roll call in the chat. Let me see who we got today. On YouTube, we got I'm Awake, nice and early at 8 o'clock in the morning with a little 62. Wine Niners Wine in the house, as always. Bry Guy, Flexin' and Steppin', Jim G, Jason A-Team, Teresa Pascarillo, RJ, Twiz, Daz, the ARS Bench, Xavier. We got a bunch of people checking in on TikTok as well. But let's get right into Jason Kelce. Because if you follow me, if you follow this show or you follow me on social media, you know that for weeks I've been talking about, one, that I thought Jason Kelce was going to retire. I expected this because you heard him talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, especially Super Bowl week, using the third person. He was referring to the Eagles as they and them, which I never heard him do before. So it led me to believe, yeah, he's done. He's going to retire. And we've talked about it on this show that I was kind of the mindset, I want him to retire. I said that on this show. I want him to retire. I wanted to see them take the cap space they could save, put it on the defensive side of the football, give Cam Jurgens the shot. For the reason you drafted him, you drafted Cam Jurgens to be the center. So I was of the mindset that I was ready for Jason Kelce to retire. I may have been wrong, guys, because I watched that press conference yesterday. And I'm not an emotional guy. My daughter sometimes says to me, Daddy, why don't you cry? Because I rarely, if ever, cry. Just never have been a crier. And I found myself yesterday watching that press conference and fighting back tears so many damn times. I knew I loved Jason Kelce. I've said that before. I knew he was a legend. I said I loved him. But watching him announce his retirement yesterday, maybe I didn't know how much I loved that man. And what he meant to this Philadelphia Eagles organization and this fan base and this city. I thought I knew, but it hit me hard yesterday. And I think it hit a lot of people hard yesterday, watching that 40 to 45-minute press conference. And I want to jump into some of the things that were said because Kelce can speak. We knew that. We all watched one of the greatest speeches ever on the steps of the Art Museum, the Rocky Steps, after Super Bowl 52. But yesterday was a different type of speech, and it really got me a few different times. But let's jump into that. And I see everybody in the chat. And feel free, keep sending your love to Kelce in the chat. I love it. But Jason Kelce, 6th rounder in 2011. When he was drafted and the Philadelphia Eagles announced the draft pick on Twitter, they actually spelled his name wrong. They spelled it Kelsey. I don't think they'll be spelling his name wrong ever again. But a 6th-round draft pick. And you heard him talk about it yesterday, and I want to get into some of the things that he said. But he talked about how in 2016, didn't have a great season. Thought that maybe he was going to get cut. Thought that maybe he was going to get traded. But it was Jeff Stoutland who believed in him. Stoutland University who believed in him. Talked to him about focusing on some fundamentals, some changes to his game. And after that season, he was a first-team All-Pro 6 of the last 7 seasons. And Jeff Kerr from CBS put out a stat last night. Jason Kelce had 6 first-team All-Pro nominations. 6 after the age of 30. Nobody's ever done that. Jerry Rice had 5. Bruce Smith had 5. Jason Kelce 6 times after the age of 30. And let's look at some of the stuff he did in the retirement speech. First of all, shows up in a cutoff T-shirt. Not in a suit or a collared shirt, in a cutoff T-shirt with a gold Rolex on his left wrist. Just perfect for Jason Kelce. And one of my favorite lines from the whole press conference was when he said, on the lacrosse field, he was LeBron James, but on the football field, he was Billy Hoyle. And I'm not sure everybody got the reference of who Billy Hoyle was. But growing up, White Men Can't Jump was one of my favorite movies with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. Billy Hoyle was Woody Harrelson's character. Was not expecting a White Men Can't Jump reference in Jason Kelce's speech. But we got one. And he talked about when he was drafted and he got the phone call from Andy Reid and his dad came rushing in because his dream was realized. And he got into some things that surprised me. I was not expecting him to talk about that sad day at training camp when Garrett Reid, Andy Reid's son, overdosed and died at training camp. Kelce talked about how that was a day he will never forget. Surprised he got into that, but I think it shows just how much that affected him and probably all the players on that team. He talked about the snow game with LaShawn McCoy that we all remember. He talked about Super Bowl 52. Nick Foles having the biggest D on the team. Dougie P having the biggest balls in the stadium. He even gave a reference to Nick Sirianni's flower speech, the infamous flower speech. He talked about his relationship with his wife, which for whatever reason got me emotional. But I think maybe, and there was a lot of good things in that speech, but maybe nothing better than when he talked about the Philadelphia fans. Because I've said it on this show multiple times that the players in this town who understand the fan base, who understand that if you just give it your all and leave it all on the field or the court or the rink, you will be loved forever. And there may not be an athlete in Philadelphia sports history who understood the Philly fan base better than Jason Kelce. And he talked about it. He talked about how the players will become demigods in this town. But that when you get that much attention, you have to be able to put up with the lows as well. Because he says this, they will let you know when you're not performing well every time. But they will also love you if you show effort, aggression, desire, the will to fight. They will love you in this city if you love it. Kelce understood that this is the best damn sports town in America for professional sports, especially when it comes to our Philadelphia Eagles. And I think he was sending a message to some of the players who were still on that football team that if you don't like it, just leave it all out on the field. And the fans will love and respect you forever. And he even talked about Zach Ertz. He talked about that story where Zach Ertz shied away from that block. And fans let him hear it all week. And to Zach Ertz's credit, the next game and every single game after that, you never saw Zach Ertz not leave it all on the field again. And for that reason, we love him here. And that led all the way to catching the game-winning touchdown in Super Bowl 52. Just a tremendous speech, a tremendous player, a great leader, great person, just a true legend in this town. And I thought I was ready for him to retire. And I don't think I was. But now we have to look to the future. And we have to figure out a couple of things. First and foremost, who's going to take his position on the field? And then maybe even more important, who's going to try to fill that role off of it and in that locker room? Now, the easy answer for the position on the field is going to be Cam Jurgens. It's the reason you drafted him 2 years ago. You took Cam Jurgens because you thought that he would eventually replace Jason Kelce. And I know Jurgens had an up-and-down season at guard last year. But I do have a lot of high hopes for him as a center. If you go back 2 years ago, I know it was only preseason. But when you saw him playing his natural position of center in the preseason, because Kelce didn't play the preseason 2 years ago, Jurgens looked pretty damn good. He's extremely athletic. So I am hopeful that Jurgens is going to be able to step into center and be effective. He's not going to be Jason Kelce. We may never see a Jason Kelce again. And Cam Jurgens can't try to be Jason Kelce. He needs to be the best version of Cam Jurgens. That's what we need from him. So I think you know who your left tackle is in Jordan Mailata. You know who your left guard is in Landon Dickerson. You know Cam Jurgens is your center, and you obviously know your right tackle is Lane Johnson. For me, the big question mark going into 2024, just like it was a big question mark going into 2023, who is your right guard? They took Tyler Steen in the 3rd round last year. Is he ready? What can we expect from Tyler Steen in his second season? He only played 71 snaps last year. So I'm not sure we know what we have in Tyler Steen. But I said this yesterday, if I'm Kellen Moore, if I'm Nick Sirianni, if I'm Howie Roseman, I'm going to Jeff Stoutland, who you heard Jason Kelce talk about, the only guy who believed in him. I'm going to Jeff Stoutland and I'm saying, is Tyler Steen ready? Is Tyler Steen ready to take the reins at right guard? And if Stoutland says he is, that's my offensive line next year. Mailata, Dickerson, Juergens, Steen, Johnson. If Stoutland doesn't think Tyler Steen's that guy, then you have to do something. You're going to have to go out in free agency. I see people talking about Runyon's son from Green Bay. The only way I'm doing that, the only way I'm going out in free agency and bringing in a starting right guard is if Jeff Stoutland tells me Tyler Steen's not the guy. So we'll see what they end up doing. Sua Opeta, who started a lot of games at right guard, he's a free agent. Do you try to bring him back? Jack Driscoll, he's a free agent. Do you try to bring him back? You're going to need depth along the offensive line, obviously. But first and foremost, we have to figure out who's the starting right guard. And let's hope it is Steen. Let's hope Stoutland says, yeah, you got the guy in the draft. But that solves the problem of who's starting for you. The bigger problem is who fills the leadership void. Who fills that leadership void? Because Jason Kelce has been the leader of this team for over a decade. And there's also reports that Fletcher Cox is going to call it quits. So now you're losing two of your biggest veteran leaders in that locker room. And I know there are other options on the offense. You have Lane Johnson. We have Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And I've talked about it before on this show. I think A.J. Brown is a leader. I do not agree with Dan Sileo even a little bit on A.J. Brown. But the way I look at 2024 is this is the perfect opportunity for Jalen Hurts to take the reins as the leader of this football team. You heard all types of chatter and stories coming out this year. Jeff McClain, Joe Santoliquito, Derek Gunn, that the Eagles want Jalen to be a more vocal leader. They want him to be a better leader. Well, now is the time. When you lose a guy like Jason Kelce and reportedly going to lose a guy like Fletcher Cox, this is now your team, Jalen Hurts. This is your time to shine, to take the reins of this Philadelphia Eagles football team, both on the field and off of it, and be the leader that we need you to be. This is a great opportunity for Jalen Hurts. And I think he'll do it. I think he's capable of doing it. But that solves the leadership issue on offense. But who are your leaders on the defensive side of the football? Because if you lose Fletcher Cox, and I know now there is a report that Brandon Graham wants to come back. The Eagles are interested in bringing him back for another year, which will be his farewell tour, his farewell season. But he's only playing about 25% of the snaps. So you need someone to be your leader on that defense. You heard Jason Kelce at his speech yesterday talk about when Carson Wentz went down with his ACL tear in Los Angeles. Who was it in that locker room that brought everybody together? We all we got. We all we need. Malcolm Jenkins. A player that I've said on this show before is one of the most underrated players in Philadelphia Eagles franchise history. I don't think we appreciate what Malcolm brought to this team, not only on the field, never left the damn field, played special teams, played every snap on defense, but the leader he was. Who do we have on the defensive side of the football that can lead this team? That can be a Malcolm Jenkins type of leader on that defense. He may not be here. He may not even be on the roster right now because there's going to be so much change to that defense. But who's going to step up and lead that defense now that Fletcher Cox is probably retiring? And I don't want to hear that it's Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham is great. We love him too. I'm glad he's going to come back for another year. He's going to give you everything he's got for the 25% of the snaps he's going to play. But we need a dog on that defense. We need a leader on that defense. Excuse me. So who's it going to be? A lot of people were hopeful Sidney Brown was going to be a leader. Well, he may not even be ready for the start of the season. Is it going to be a Reed Blankenship? Is it going to be one of these young corners that can step up? Is Nakobe Dean going to be the guy we were hoping he was when we took him out of Georgia? He was the leader of maybe one of the best defenses the NCAA has ever seen when he was at Georgia. Could it be a guy like Nolan Smith or Jordan Davis or Jalen Carter? But all these guys need to step up next year on the field and off of it because we need leaders. So we'll see what happens. But a big loss for the Philadelphia Eagles, a big loss for our city. But the good news is I think we'll still see a lot of Jason Kelce. It's not as if he's going to be one of these guys that retires and goes off into the sunset and enjoys his life in his retirement. We're going to see a lot of Jason Kelce. I think it's only a matter of time before it gets announced that he's probably going to cut a deal with Amazon Prime or ESPN or Fox or CBS. We're going to see him on TV. I just hope and pray he has some sort of relationship and is involved some way with the Eagles organization. Because the more Jason Kelce's around this team, the better, in my opinion. And I see people in the chat, and I'm curious on your opinion, because I see you saying some defensive players. But who do you see on this roster right now on defense that can really step up and be a leader for this team? And if you're here on TikTok, check in as well. What defensive players do you expect to take that leap next year? To take that leap to be not only a player on the field, but a leader off of it. Because they do have a lot of young players that we had high hopes for. We just really haven't seen them put it all together yet. Nolan Smith. When they drafted Nolan Smith in the first round last year, I was ecstatic. And I actually tweeted out when they drafted him, this may be your next captain on defense, with the way Nolan Smith spoke and he said all the right things. We just didn't really see it translate onto the field this year. And he only played 200 snaps. So we need Nolan Smith to step up. And I see Jim G in the chat talking about Haason Reddick. Yeah, if Reddick is here next year, he could be a leader on that defense. They need to figure out this damn contract, though. They need to figure out whether or not Haason Reddick's even part of the plans in the future. I see people talking about Nakobe Dean. Well, Dean's got to stay healthy. Dean has to stay on the field to be a leader. I think he has all the attributes to be a leader. Like I said, he was the alpha on a defense that was full of alphas at Georgia. So Nakobe Dean has that personality to be a leader, but he has to stay healthy. He's got to do it on the field. I see people talking about Sidney Brown, but he's got to stay healthy. He's not going to be ready to start the season. So there's a lot of question marks with Kelce retiring, with Fletcher Cox retiring. more so in the leadership perspective than on the field. Yeah, there'll be a drop-off in play from Kelce, no doubt about it. He's a first-team All-Pro 6 out of the last 7 seasons. He's a first-ballot Hall of Famer, which he'll be eligible 2029. So mark it down, because hopefully we're seeing Jason Kelce get that gold jacket in 2029. And even with Fletcher Cox retiring, we have a lot of young defensive tackles in Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Marlon Tuipulotu. Guys that can fill the role on the field. The bigger question is just who's going to take the reins of this team and be the true leaders. And I think this is a great opportunity, like I said, for Jalen Hurts to be the leader that the Eagles want him to be the leader that this team needs. But they also need a leader on that defensive side of the football. And with Fletcher Cox most likely retiring, who's it going to be? Someone has to step up and be that Malcolm Jenkins type of leader. And this team needs leadership, because even with a Jason Kelce, even with a Fletcher Cox, that veteran leadership didn't do anything for you last year. That veteran leadership couldn't stop the slide of losing 6 of your last 7 games, getting blown out in Tampa against a team that should not have even beat you, let alone blow you out in the wild card. So this team needs leaders, needs new voices. But when we get back, I want to switch gears a little bit, do a quick Flyers talk, quick Sixers talk, and then I want to take a look around some of the news that's come out over the last few days from the NFL. Looks like some quarterbacks may be moving, and that could have an impact on the Philadelphia Eagles. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This is the Philly Sports Power Hour. Hit that like button, hit that share button. We'll be right back.
Go for the pulls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.
Philadelphia fans, we're cut from a different cloth. Born into a brotherhood and bonded to our team for life. We believe anything is possible because we've witnessed the impossible. While we may be from different neighborhoods, come Sunday, we are one, and we will be heard. Pondley Hockey, official partner of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and certainly the easiest when you're watching the NBA. And the NBA playoffs are almost here, and you can win money making picks. What are you waiting for? Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com and use the promo code WIN. An Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN. Get ready for the NBA and get ready for the NBA playoffs. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com. Use the promo code WIN.
Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.
E-A-G-L-E-S. Eagles.
What's up, and welcome back into the Philly Sports Power Hour with Bill Colarulo. During the commercial break, we were still live on TikTok, so having some good conversation with some of our TikTok crew. And one of the viewers on TikTok was talking about how the Giants are going to get their quarterback this year. Thinks they're going to make a trade and move up in the draft to get somebody. But we'll talk more about that in a second, because there's going to be some quarterback movement that could affect the NFC, with some quarterbacks moving around when free agency kicks off in pretty much less than a week. Legal tampering period next Monday. But real quick, let's talk a little Philadelphia Flyers. We won't spend too much time. I know not everybody are hockey fans, although you should be, because this team, they're playing hard. We're going to get playoff hockey. It's a tight race. But they pick up a big point last night. They lose in a shootout to the St. Louis Blues. And it was a shame, because Sam Ersson stood on his head, made one of the best saves I've seen in a shootout, throwing out his right pad. You got to watch it if you haven't seen the replay. Throwing out his right pad. But unfortunately, they lose in a shootout. The goalie, Binnington, I think it's Binnington, for St. Louis, played really well last night. But they pick up the point. 2 points would have been nice, but every single point right now matters, because you look at the Metropolitan Division. They can keep separating themselves. Right now, they're in third place in the Metro with 72 points. You got the Islanders 6 points behind, but the Islanders have 3 games in hand. So they got to keep picking up points. The Capitals also 7 points behind, 3 games in hand. The Devils, 8 points behind, but 2 games in hand. So the Flyers have to keep winning games. But 19 games left. We're sitting here. It's March 5th, and we're talking about the Philadelphia Flyers, games that matter. I want playoff hockey back. And I don't have any crazy expectations that this team can win a Stanley Cup. But if I'm one of these other NHL teams, I don't want to see the Philadelphia Flyers in the playoffs, because the brand of hockey they play, they lead the NHL in block shots. The brand of hockey they play is very tough in the playoffs. And they're doing all this right now without their all-star, Travis Konechny. Really without Carter Hart, although Sam Ersson's been playing really well. But once Konechny comes back, hopefully Jamie Drysdale, the defenseman, comes back, they could make some noise in the playoffs. But I'm not getting greedy. I just want playoffs. I just want to be down at the Wells Fargo Center for playoff hockey. And the NHL playoffs are unbelievable. So big point last night. 19 games to play for the Fly guys. Every point matters. But show them a little support. They're playing hard. Then we got our Sixers back in action tonight. Winners of 2 straight. They play the Brooklyn Nets tonight, which should be a win. But you never know what Tobias Harris you're going to get. But ever since Nick Nurse made the change, putting Kyle Lowry in the starting lineup, Tobias is playing pretty well. Tobias is playing really well over the last 2. And people are saying Facebook's down. Facebook's down? Getting some stuff in the chat. Facebook went down for a little bit. People are going to lose their minds. But the Sixers back in action tonight. I'm expecting Kyle Lowry to remain in the starting lineup. We talk about leadership on the Eagles and Jason Kelce and all that, but Kyle Lowry brings a lot of leadership to this team. Question is how many minutes can a 37-year-old play? And I see in the chat, I'm awake, are you, saying Flyers bandwagon. Come on, Bill. What are you talking about? He's saying I'm on the bandwagon. I've been preaching about the Flyers for months for people to start watching. So, and everybody get on the bandwagon. We're not going to kick you off. I understand why people stopped watching. They were a tough product for a couple years. But they're headed in the right direction right now. They got a lot of young talent. They play really hard. It's a fun team to watch. Get on the bandwagon now. Because when this team wins a cup in the next couple of years, you could say, oh, I've been watching this team forever. So, big game tonight, though, for the Sixers. But let's take a look around the NFL because a lot of changes potentially happening. Wine Niners Wine, I got to give you credit. He says, Flyers, baby, who started the wagon here? Wine Niners Wine has been on the Flyers bandwagon all season. I'll give you credit, Wine Niners Wine. You have been. But let's take a look around the NFL. So some of the big news, as expected, Russell Wilson gets released by the Denver Broncos. We all knew this was coming, but now what? And you look at the Denver Broncos. What a disaster that trade and signing was. Because when the Broncos traded for Russell Wilson, they didn't have to give him a new deal. He was still under contract. But the Broncos not only give up a ton to get him, they give him an extension. So now, Russell Wilson's dead cap hit, what he's going to count against the cap for the Denver Broncos over the next 2 seasons is the most in NFL history. $85 million in dead cap. $35 million this year. $50 million next year. You remember when we were all freaking out about Carson Wentz's dead cap hit when Roseman traded him to the Indianapolis Colts? Wentz's dead cap was $33.8 million. We were losing our minds over $33.8 million. Could you imagine $85 million? 85 freaking million against the cap for the Denver Broncos, and that may not even be the worst of it. They gave up 2 first-round draft picks, 2 second-round draft picks, a 5th-round draft pick, quarterback Drew Lock, defensive lineman Shelby Harris, and tight end Noah Fant to get Russell Wilson, and then gave him a new deal. And he stunk in Denver. Absolutely insane what the Denver Broncos did. And I know there were reports back then that the Eagles were looking into maybe making a trade for Russell Wilson. We don't know if that's true or not, but thank God it didn't happen. But I see Shooter McGavin saying, worst trade in history. I was reading some things today where they were ranking some of the worst trades in history and where the Russell Wilson trade ranked. And Bleacher Report actually had 2 trades worse than the Russell Wilson trade. I'm not sure I agree or not, but one of them was the 49ers trade for Trey Lance, because they gave up a ton to Miami to go from 12 to 3 that year to get Lance. They sent the 12th overall pick, a 2021 third-round pick, and first-round picks in 2022 and 2023 to move up to get Trey Lance. Now, the only reason why I don't necessarily agree that that was worse than the Russell Wilson trade was because then you gave Russell Wilson that new deal. At least the 49ers, yeah, they lost all the draft capital, but they didn't lose a bunch of cap space because Trey Lance was still on a rookie contract. But the one that Bleacher Report ranks as the worst trade in NFL history isn't the Deshaun Watson one that I see people talking about. It was when the Vikings acquired Herschel Walker from the Dallas Cowboys in 1989. Minnesota gave up linebacker Jesse Solomon, linebacker David Howard, cornerback Isaac Holt, defensive end Alex Stewart, a 1990 first-round pick, second-round pick, and sixth-round pick, a 1991 first-round pick and second-round pick, and a 1992 first, second, and third. Pretty much gave up everything to get Herschel Walker. And then the Dallas Cowboys and Jimmy Johnson turned that into the dynasty that the Dallas Cowboys became. So I may agree with Bleacher Report on that one, that the Vikings trade for Herschel Walker may have been worse than the Denver Broncos trade for Russell Wilson, but this one's up there, man. So now the question is, where does Russell Wilson go? Because Russell Wilson right now, this coming season, is owed $38 million by the Broncos. He makes $38 million no matter what. If he signs with another team, the Broncos just get a credit for whatever he gets paid. So if Russell Wilson went to a new team and he took the veteran minimum, went to a new team and said, hey, just give me the veteran minimum, it's $1.2 million. He still makes $38 million, but he would get a little over $36 million from the Broncos and then $1.2 million from whatever new team he signed. So it's an attractive option for teams that don't have a quarterback, because you could get Russell Wilson for pretty much nothing. So the odds are out as to who Russell Wilson's next team would be. Number one is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, there are reports that the Steelers said they're not interested in Russell Wilson, but they have the best odds right now of signing Russell Wilson. Number two, and this is the one that I would keep an eye on, the Las Vegas Raiders. The Las Vegas Raiders have the second best odds right now to land Russell Wilson. That's where I could see him going. And then third best odds, Atlanta Falcons. Fourth, New England Patriots. Fifth, Minnesota Vikings. Washington Commanders, Tampa Bay Bucks, Tennessee Titans, then the New York Giants. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, maybe the Giants. But according to the odds, they're not even in the top five. Now, the reason the Minnesota Vikings are on this list is because there was another report yesterday that Kirk Cousins could be headed to the Atlanta Falcons. And that's something that could affect the Philadelphia Eagles, not only because it changes the Minnesota Vikings team, but the Atlanta Falcons have a lot of weapons on offense. Drake London at wide receiver, Bijan Robinson at running back, Kyle Pitts at tight end. What they lacked this year was a quarterback. What they have? Taylor Heineke, Desmond Ridder. So Kirk Cousins could do a lot for that Atlanta Falcons team. Now, I know people have strong feelings about Kirk Cousins and that, hey, he's going to do a great job in fantasy football, but he's never going to be able to win a big game. But that could be an interesting move for the Falcons to get a Kirk Cousins. And then if they get Kirk Cousins, well, then who's the Minnesota Vikings quarterback? And that's why it could make sense for maybe them to get a guy like Russell Wilson, who's actually younger than Kirk Cousins. How old's Russell Wilson right now? Russell Wilson is 35. How old's Captain Kirk? And Kirk Cousins is also 35. Why do I think he was younger? Kirk Cousins in August will be 36. Okay, that's why. Only by a couple of months. I thought he was a year younger. But that could be an interesting move for the Atlanta Falcons, and then it opens up the door for the Minnesota Vikings. So interesting stuff. Keep an eye on that once Russell Wilson's officially cut and the league year starts. And I see people talking about how Captain Kirk could look good in Pittsburgh as well. He could, but if I'm Cousins, I'm probably going to Atlanta. And the report was, me see if I could find it. There was a report that he was actually looking at houses down there. Let me see who gave us that report. So it says here, who gave the report? I'm reading it on ProFootballTalk.com that he was looking at houses down there. So they actually say, according to Mike Florio, we can't get into the specifics for now, but we are getting very credible indications that Cousins is seriously considering moving his family to Atlanta, which would mean, obviously, that he'd be signing with the Falcons. So they can't get into who gave them that information, but they got information that Kirk Cousins is looking there. Now, there's another option for Russell Wilson, and that could be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know some of people in the chat, I think Shooter McGavin's a huge Baker Mayfield fan and gets mad at me for not giving Baker Mayfield more credit. I just don't think Mayfield's that good of a quarterback. Could they make a move potentially for a Russell Wilson? So we'll see what happens, but that's something to keep an eye on. Some other news around the NFL, and this came out either Friday or Saturday. San Francisco 49ers, after Super Bowl 58, fired Steve Wilks. And I thought, in addition to Kyle Shanahan just looking for somebody to blame besides himself, I thought that they must have known who they were going to go after as the next defensive coordinator. And my concern was that they were going to go after a guy like a Mike Vrabel or a Bill Belichick. But they don't do that. The San Francisco 49ers promote Nick Sorensen, who was a defensive assistant and passing game specialist under Steve Wilks, a guy who's never been a defensive coordinator before in this league, who was a special teams coordinator a couple years ago. So I love this move. I love that the 49ers fired Steve Wilks and didn't bring in a veteran defensive coordinator. They turned things over to Nick Sorensen. Now, maybe it turns out that Nick Sorensen's a genius. We don't know. But I just really like the way things are headed in San Francisco as an Eagles fan. With them having cap trouble, the Super Bowl hangover, firing a defensive coordinator, hiring a first-time defensive coordinator, rumblings that Brandon Ayuk wants out. So I really like what's going on in San Francisco. And I see on TikTok talking about quarterback movement, White Boy Drip Drip says he wants Justin Fields in Atlanta. Also likes Kirk Cousins. But yeah, what happens with Justin Fields? We still don't know. Does Chicago trade away the first pick? Or do they decide they're going to trade Justin Fields? So a lot of moving parts over the next couple of weeks. This is what makes the offseason in the NFL so damn exciting. Some other news around the NFL. I don't usually care about Johnny Manziel or what Johnny Manziel has to say, but I agree with Johnny Manziel on this one. He tweeted out that he will no longer be attending the Heisman Trophy ceremony until they give Reggie Bush his trophy back. So obviously Reggie Bush, he took some money from an agent back in the day before NIL was permitted, when the NCAA was just ripping these kids off while they were in college. So I support Johnny Manziel. Give Reggie Bush his damn trophy back. It's ridiculous now with the NIL deals and everything the way it is, that Reggie Bush, because he took a little money from an agent, doesn't have his Heisman Trophy. So I agree with him on that one. Some other news. If you're watching the Combine, obviously, Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver from Texas, runs a 4.21 40. Fastest ever. Beats John Ross, who ran a 4.22. But we'll see. Does that mean the kid can play? Now, he had some success at the University of Texas. Last year, 75 catches, over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. But I know Xavier Worthy was a guy that some fans thought maybe the Eagles could get in the second round. I think now with him running the 4-2-1, you're going to see some team reach and probably take him in the first round. I don't want it to be the Eagles. Do not take a wide receiver first overall, please, with your first pick. But you're going to see some team enamored with the speed and probably take him in the first round. So that's kind of some news around the NFL. Now I want to talk about quickly, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. But on Tuesday of last week at the press conference, hold on, I want to see what's going on here. Wine Niners wine. Oh, he's talking about me being a lawyer. But last week at the press conference, and we could talk more about this tomorrow on the show, but last week at the press conference, Nick Sirianni was asked about Kellen Moore because the last time Nick Sirianni spoke at the end of the season press conference, we didn't know who the offensive coordinator was going to be. So this was his first time being asked questions when we knew it was Kellen Moore. And he kind of was asked about what the plan was this season with the offense. Now, at the end of the season press conference, Sirianni basically said it's going to be whoever we hire their offense. And he was asked, well, what are you going to do? And we thought he was going to be this true CEO-type coach. Well, he says on Tuesday, a week ago at the Combine, that they're going to mesh ideas, that there's going to be a meshing of the ideas of the things that Sirianni did well and what Kellen Moore does well. And everybody's freaking out about it. And I understand because we've seen this movie before. If you go back to the 2020 season, before 2020, when the offense looked a little stale, Jeffrey Lurie insisted that Doug Peterson bring in Rich Scangarello for new ideas. They didn't use the word fresh ideas like they did this year. They said new ideas. And it was an absolute disaster. Rich Scangarello had been the offensive coordinator in Denver. He was from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. So what the hope was is he was going to bring this play action, a lot of motion type of offense and be able to mix that with Doug Peterson's style of offense and really unlock Carson Wentz and this offense. And it was an absolute disaster. That year, the Eagles go 4-11-1. Carson Wentz threw 15 interceptions. They were 24th in total yards, 28th in passing, and 25th in points. So I understand why a lot of people are concerned about Sirianni saying they're going to mesh ideas with Kellen Moore. Now, the only way that this works, the only way, is if Nick Sirianni leaves his ego at the door. Ego will be the enemy here. If it's just simply Sirianni telling Kellen Moore, hey, over the last 3 seasons, these are some of the things that Jalen Hurts did well in our offense. But then give Kellen Moore full autonomy to game plan, call plays, and run the style of offense he wants, then it makes sense. It'd be dumb for them not to do that. It would be dumb for Nick Sirianni, who has had some success. I know everybody wants to talk about how Sirianni's a clown, but if you look at the last 3 seasons, the offense has had some success. And I know Shane Steichen was the OC for 2 years, but Sirianni was still involved in that offense, and they were extremely good. So it would be dumb for him not to share some ideas with Kellen Moore, but he's got to leave that ego at the door. He has to give Kellen Moore the autonomy because the problem that we saw in 2020 with Dougie P and Rich Scangarello is that this was still Dougie P's offense. He was still the offensive coordinator, essentially, calling all the plays. So I think it could work in this scenario because Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore is calling the plays. But Sirianni's got to leave his ego at the door. He cannot try to force Kellen Moore to do things. This has to be Kellen Moore's offense. But I do agree, yes, you should give him some of the things that Hurts has done well. None bigger than the run-pass option game. Figure out a way to make that effective again. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow on the show. But like we end every Philly Sports Power Hour with a little today in sports history. And this was a good one. I remember watching this game. March 5th, 2004. 20 years ago to the day. The Philadelphia Flyers set an NHL record that still stands to this day with the Ottawa Senators for the most penalty minutes in a game, 419 penalty minutes. By the end of the game, there was only 3 players on the Flyers bench. And to set the stage, about a week before, Havlat for the Senators slashed Mark Recchi in the face. So we knew there was going to be some repercussions. And the game kind of started out slow, and then Donald Brashear, who remembers that beast? Brashear was the man. But Brashear drops his gloves, and he fights, Rob Ray was the enforcer for the Senators. And then all hell broke loose. Everybody on the ice was fighting. Then they go to drop the puck. Everybody fights again. Goalie's going at it. Robert Esch going at it. That game was absolutely insane. It was like watching the Broad Street Bullies from back in the day. So 20 years ago today, Philadelphia Flyers, Ottawa Senators brawl. You know it was a big game that you can actually Google it, and there's an entire Wikipedia page all about it. So take a look if you have some time and read about that, and go on YouTube and just search and watch those fights again, because that was incredible. But that was 20 years ago today. That's our today in sports history. And I appreciate everybody in the chat saying all the kind words. So make sure you're following. We'll be back here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Got to confirm with Kayla Santiago, who I know you guys all enjoy. So she'll come on tomorrow. Hopefully we'll do a little Sixers talk, a little Eagles talk. I know she's a big Jason Kelce fan, so we'll get her take on everything that happened as well. But I appreciate you spending this hour with me. Hit that like button, hit that share button. Like Wine Niners Wine tells you every day, make sure you're subscribed to all my social media channels. Make sure you're following me across the board. Would love to hear from all of you. So we'll be back here tomorrow. Thanks for watching. And as always, go Birds.
Go for the polls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.